When we think of sports in the modern day, we could probably reel off at least a dozen different competitive games. Sports are so present on TVs, on the news and in our homes that it's difficult to imagine life without them. Well, as I'm sure it's no surprise to hear, there probably wasn't much of a period in human history where we didn't have them. Even the earliest humans were known to play forms of rugby or football or athletics. And plenty of us still celebrate or practice some of the sports we took from antiquity. Just look at the Olympics. We might not have got to enjoy Tokyo 2020 last year, but we have enjoyed a rich tradition of modern Olympic Games that stretch back every 4 years to 1896 in Athens, which themselves were revived as a tradition which stretched back all the way to well over 1000 BCE, though they were first recorded in 776 BCE. With the knowledge that sports were an important part of life in both ancient Greece and ancient Rome, let's have a closer look at these sports and learn a little more about what they meant for the ancients and their cultural legacy. We've touched on the Olympics already, and it seems as fitting a place to start as any. These games, known as the Olympiakoi Agones, were immensely important to the ancient Greeks. They represented a chance for the very best of Greek athletes to prove their worth in the eyes of the gods and their peers. Victors in the games would be awarded the Kodinos, the symbol of Apollo, who, amongst other things, was the Greek god of sport. And what would an ancient athlete have competed in to have a chance at earning the Kodinos? A better question would be, what didn't they compete in? They ran both sprints and long distance, they boxed, wrestled, threw discuses and javelins, they rode horses and chariots, and tested how far they could jump. Not so dissimilar then to today's track and field events. The ancient Olympics captured the imaginations and wonder of all Greeks. They were a chance to emulate the famous gods and heroes of their myths. We can see in the ancient epics that the Greeks and Trojans like Ajax, Odysseus and Hector tested their mettle against their peers in athletic competition too. So when the Olympics occurred in the classical period, Greeks from all city-states flocked to Olympia to earn their glory as an athlete, get their fill of the actions as spectators, or get their creative juices flowing as poets or musicians. While there were other pan-Hellenic games across Greece for athletes to prove themselves in, like the Isthmian Games, the Nemean Games, or the Pythian Games, the Olympics were so culturally significant that even during the Peloponnesian War between the states, Olympia maintained its status as a neutral ground for the games. This Olympic truce was kept every 4 years when it was held, known as Ekecheiria. There were many events, so let's look a little closer at some of the individual sports and competitions we might have seen from the stands of one of these great Greek games. Fittingly in line with the way of human evolution, the very first competitive event was the running race, or stadion, named for the stadium that it was held in. By today's standard, the stadion would be considered a sprint just short of 200 meters. A new race then developed called the Dolichos, which tested athletes' endurance over the span of around 3 miles, or nearly 5 kilometers. It's worth noting, in fact, that the marathon was never an Olympic race. One event we'll recognise was in fact held at the Pan-Hellenic Games, and this was the pentathlon. It involved the stadion sprint, javelin and discus throws, a long jump, and ended up with wrestling. Rather different to today's pentathlon. Another familiar word to us might be hippodrome, known to the ancients as hippodromos, literally horse course. The Greeks used horses widely across the Hellenic world, for transport, freight and for warfare, so it's hardly surprising the ability to ride well, and ride fast, became a critical boasting point for horse owners. I say owners and not riders, because it was in fact the owners who took credit when their jockey won a race. Horses did not come cheap, and anyone rich enough to afford one and be able to sufficiently please the gods with a victory monument upon winning would be unlikely to waste their energy on training. I suppose it wouldn't matter to the audience who took the credit though, as long as they got a good show. And not content with the price and risk of competitive horse racing, an even bigger horsing event in Greece emerged. This was, of course, chariot racing, harmatodromia. Pricier, more dangerous, and far more fun to watch, chariot racing became a staple of ancient Greek sport. Few things would have compared to the roar of the hippodrome stands, accompanied by trumpets while chariots thundered around the course. Ancient art even tells us of a variation of chariot racing called apobates, in which riders would jump on and off moving chariots in full armour, a true test of skill, agility, and courage. The mechanics of the sport, even during classical Greece, was remarkable. The technology behind the gates, known to them as husplex or huspleges, allowed for a spring-loaded, staggered start. So popular was this sport that it continued well into the Roman and Byzantine empires. Chariots would eventually be pulled by a team of no less than 4 horses apiece. This death ribbon race would become a hallmark of the Roman arena, the circus, where the race was known as the quadriga. The most famous of these was the Circus Maximus in Rome itself. It was so popular, when chariots raced here, accounts tell us the city would be practically empty. Up to 250,000 spectators were said to attend. Often these races could be considered blood sports, perhaps even more so than the boxing and wrestling, and many were known to die on the racecourse. The crashes were frequent and brutal. Virgil was known to compare chariot racing to naval battles, so it was no wonder that a crash became known as a naufragium, or shipwreck. In Rome, the sport developed its rules and systems. Festivals celebrating chariot racing were called equiria, and it became embedded in the empire's politics. Political factions would lend their backing to the 4 racing factions, gambling was refined and widespread, and we see evidence of rather brutal forms of hooliganism between fans of the different teams. Under Rome, the sport really tested its limits too. A chariot driver, known in Latin as an auriga, usually drove 4 horses, but accounts show us that the ambitious or insane aurigae were known to try and control up to 10 of them around the course. No wonder the audiences were so big. But chariot racing was not the only sport an ancient Roman would go crazy for. No discussion here would be complete without mention of gladiators. Synonymous with blood sport, not even a part-time fan of antiquity could go long without seeing some piece of pop culture depicting these savage duels in the arena. While there were bloody arenas in which people, often slaves, fought to the death in ancient Greece, gladiatorial combat was first an Etruscan and then singularly Roman affair. The sheer scale and brutality of these games made any previous combat sport pale in comparison. The Pankration in ancient Greek Olympics was a combat sport for warriors, but it was a sport of refinement and precision. A sleek combination of boxing, wrestling, kicks and grapples, it paved the way for the modern mixed martial arts craze. Films like 300 loved to glorify the martial prowess of the ancient Greeks, and with Pankration training, literally meaning pan, kratos, all power, it was no wonder they dominated. But the gladiatorial games were a spectator sport for Romans to see the less fortunate slaves and the downtrodden take up cruelly designed weapons against each other. True, there was renown and potential freedom to be won on the sands, but it was a barbaric way to accomplish it. Little wonder then that there were so many gladiator revolutions. Gladiators trained in a ludus, and over time, many different combat schools developed. Fighters would settle on a style such as murmillo or retarius with accompanying weapons and equipment. The arena's popularity was frequently used to propagate political agendas too. Victims of Roman conquest would often be sent there as punishment to die for Roman pleasure, and even emperors would stand on the sands in likely very controlled conditions to earn glory before their citizens. Exotic beasts were known to be sent for gladiators to fight. It would have been a surefire way of pulling in crowds to see hitherto unseen lions or tigers take on the fighters. Over time, however, the brutality of the games became seen as incompatible with societal values, and particularly as Christianity in Rome grew, so gladiatorial combat declined and was eventually banned. Unfortunately, we don't have nearly enough time in this video to go over more detail or cover the host of smaller sports the ancients enjoyed over their long eras, so I'll leave it there. If anyone would like to know more about a particular sport or activity in ancient life, just drop it down below in the comments. This could be on athletic training or diets, a day in the life, or about something else entirely. There may even be an opportunity in the future to explore more of the Greek and Roman home life, regarding some of the activities or hobbies or games parents and children would have enjoyed in their spare time in the ancient world.